Picture this. It's a crisp Sunday evening, and you and your spouse are running late for a play. You hop in your car, hit a bit of traffic at a checkpoint, get into a mild argument with a security guard, and accidentally bring the entire world to the brink of global nuclear annihilation. Sounds like a rejected Hollywood script, right? But in October 1961, this exact absurdly terrifying scenario played out in reality. Showdown at Checkpoint Charlie, the 1961 Berlin crisis. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most suspenseful, high-stakes moments of the Cold War. We're going to look at how a seemingly localized, almost procedural dispute over ID papers rapidly escalated into a terrifying standoff between global superpowers. Showdown at Checkpoint Charlie, a diplomat, a Volkswagen, and M48 tanks. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really understand how this crisis spun out of control, we have to start at ground zero, in a divided city simmering with tension just months after the Berlin Wall was erected. It's Sunday, October 22, 1961. E. Allen Leitner Jr., who is America's top diplomat in West Berlin, and his wife Dorothy are in their Volkswagen sedan. They're heading to East Berlin to see a performance by an experimental Czech theater company. It's just a simple night out, but when they get to the border, the East German People's Police, the VOPOs, demand to see their identification. Now, under four-power post-war procedures, Allied civilians were absolutely not required to show papers to East Germans, only to Soviet representatives. So following protocol, Leitner flat-out refuses. And wow, the escalation here is just dizzying. For 45 solid minutes, tempers are flaring. Dorothy is literally lecturing the guards from the passenger seat. Finally, Leitner decides he's going to assert his Allied rights, shouts, "We're coming through," and actually guns his engine to muscle through the barricades. Naturally, the Bopos surround his car. Sensing the danger, U.S. General Lucius Clay, who is operating from an underground bunker, doesn't just send an MP to calm things down. No, he deploys armed infantry squads with bayonets and 4 massive M48 tanks mounted with bulldozers right to the borderline. U.S. troops physically escort Leitner's car back and forth across the border under the barrel of American tank cannons. It isn't until 10 p.m. that a senior Soviet official finally arrives to apologize and de-escalate the immediate situation on the ground. But you know what's really wild? It's how the communist propaganda machine spun this near catastrophe. Instead of acknowledging a massive diplomatic standoff, East German radio broadcasted this to U.S. soldiers. It will be a long time before Minister Leitner takes his girlfriend out and tries to shack up with her in East Berlin over the weekend. Seriously? They completely fabricated a scandalous affair, called his wife Dorothy his girlfriend, and turned a high-stakes military confrontation into a cheap tabloid story. General Clay's ultimatum, pushing the president's hand. Let's see what was happening behind the scenes. While East German radio was spinning jokes, the reality was deadly serious. To understand why tanks were brought to a checkpoint over a theater date, we have to zoom out to the U.S. military headquarters and look at the motivations of General Lucius Clay. Just 4 days before this border incident, General Clay had drafted a massive, almost 1,800-word letter to President John F. Kennedy. Clay was intensely frustrated. He felt the U.S. had been entirely too risk-averse when the Berlin Wall went up, and he strongly believed the only way to hold the line against further Soviet encroachment was to show absolute, unyielding military resolve. In that letter, Clay included this incredibly loaded statement: "I did not come here to add to your problems and that I am gladly expendable." Talk about a masterclass in military strong-arming. Clay was essentially threatening to resign if the president didn't grant him more local authority to push back against the Soviets. Kennedy's advisors were terrified of a repeat of the MacArthur-Truman affair, where a popular general's resignation could cause a massive political earthquake back home. Clay knew exactly what his leverage was, and he used it to force Washington to take a harder line. In that same letter, Clay methodically laid out a really severe contingency plan if U.S. access to Berlin was ever physically blocked. First, probe with light military strength to test the enemy's intent. Second, if stopped by superior forces, immediately resort to an airlift and economic blockades to buy time. And third, prepare for what he called the ultimate decision. Let's pause for a second to make sure the gravity of this term sinks in. The ultimate decision was General Clay's polite, bureaucratic euphemism for initiating global nuclear conflict. He was calmly and explicitly preparing the President of the United States for the very real possibility of nuclear war over access rights to Berlin. That is the powder keg sitting right beneath Allen Leitner's Volkswagen. The Allied resistance of fractured Western Front. The tension, unfortunately, wasn't just between the East and the West. If we zoom out entirely to the global stage, we uncover a terrifying disconnect between Washington and its own European allies. We had a stark philosophical chasm dividing the Western alliance at literally the worst possible time. On one hand, you have President Kennedy. He is desperately seeking new approaches. He wants to negotiate with Moscow to avoid a nuclear holocaust. But on the other hand, you have French President Charles de Gaulle and West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. They are vehemently anti-negotiation. They firmly believe that going to the negotiating table right after the Berlin Wall was built signals weakness, invites further aggression, and is essentially surrender. De Gaulle was incredibly dismissive of Kennedy's fears. When the U.S. warned that pushing back too hard might provoke the Soviets to strike, de Gaulle countered with this sharp quote, "A wild beast that is going to spring does so without waiting that long." He outright refused to join preliminary discussions for negotiations, arguing that you just cannot make working arrangements with people who are actively threatening you with atomic bombs. And the West Germans were equally aggressive. In a highly tense Oval Office meeting just 2 days after the Checkpoint Charlie incident, West German Ambassador Wilhelm Griwe delivered Chancellor Adenauer's blunt message to JFK. West Germany was prepared for war. They actually feared JFK's reliance on a conventional military buildup, demanding instead a clear threat of a preemptive nuclear strike to keep the Soviets at bay. And to highlight the very real human cost of JFK's cautious diplomacy, Griwe pointed out that before the wall, Berlin saw 500,000 daily border crossings. Now, just 500. Think about the sheer scale of that drop. It was a deeply fractured Western Front.
The diplomatic fallout, reeling in the rogues. Let's bring things back to Washington.
So, in the immediate aftermath of our inciting incident, while General Clay is flexing his military muscle and European allies are demanding nuclear threats, the U.S. State Department is absolutely scrambling to pull its diplomats back from the edge. Washington urgently needed to rein in the rogues. Berlin Task Force Chief Foy Kohler gets on the phone directly with Alan Leitner to pull him out from under General Clay's hawkish spell. Kohler reminds Leitner in no uncertain terms that he reports to the Secretary of State, not to a renegade military general. Kohler even officially documents the conversation as being full of double talk and insubordination. Washington is furious that Leitner's unexpected border stunt is hijacking the president's diplomatic agenda. So the crucial point of this whole event is really this sharp contrast. On one side, we have General Clay's unilateral aggressive border moves, tanks, bayonets, pure brinkmanship. He honestly believed showing force was the only way to maintain the city's morale and rights. On the other side, we have JFK's careful, calculated Oval Office diplomacy, trying to wrangle fractured allies in open talks with the Soviets to save the world from nuclear fire. This was an incredibly dangerous tightrope walk between local military posturing and cautious global strategy. Which leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. In the nuclear age, how do we balance a local commander's need to maintain immediate authority on the ground with a national leader's ultimate duty to manage a global existential risk? I mean, a single foot on a gas pedal in a Volkswagen almost changed human history forever. It truly highlights the fragility of the chain of command. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped illuminate just how close we came to the edge and the incredible balancing act required to step back from it. Until next time, keep questioning the history that shapes our world.